Welcome to the Nate KG Podcast, a show dedicated to exploring the nuances of jump rope, where I talk with jumpers of all skill levels, backgrounds, and fitness goals. On this episode of the podcast, I talk with Dylan Plummer at Dylan M. Plummer on Instagram. Dylan is a decorated competitive jump rope athlete and one of the original jumpers who used to post to YouTube over a decade ago. Dylan and I originally met digitally during those YouTube days, but this is actually the first full conversation we've had. And we go very deep on this one. We start out discussing his computer science profession and how he's using machine learning in the biology field, which is extremely interesting. And then we move into more jump rope focused topics, such as the accessibility of information in our sport, how the impossible becomes possible, whether or not older jumpers over 20 can be faster than youth, and a whole lot more. All of the show notes for this episode can be found over at natekg.com. And now, please enjoy this interview of Dylan Plummer. Dylan, welcome to the show. This has been a long time coming, but you're here and we're going to get into some good stuff. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Nate. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to get into this. I look forward to where our conversation goes.
Yeah, this is going to be great. Let's just go straight into it because we were talking beforehand a little bit and the energy is already jamming. So let's go straight into your profession. I want to know what you do professionally. And a few details around that so we can kind of get a picture of actually some non-jump rope stuff first.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm currently a computer science PhD student at Case Western Reserve University. That's in Cleveland, Ohio. And so I study computer science, and my focus is on machine learning, or you could just say artificial intelligence if you want to be more broad. But I mainly use those technologies and apply them to biology. But broadly, my research area pretty much just involves learning really interesting, simple there could be like low dimensional, as in, you only need a few numbers to describe it. Learning interesting, simple representations of really complex data. So an example of that is maybe you have a bunch of images of people's faces. Each image is maybe 1,000 by 1,000 pixels. So now you have 1 million data point or 1 million numbers that describe every single image. And now what if I asked you to write a program that can take every one of those images and just encode it into, maybe 10 numbers. Each of those numbers represents maybe the person's hair color, their eye color, the position of their face, and, just high level concepts that apply to those images. Could you take those 1 million numbers and for every single image, convert those into a simple representation? And so it's impossible to do by hand. I mean, it's just an impossible task. But through machine learning, we can learn patterns in the data that actually allow us to make that mapping. So we can simplify really complex information into something that's more feasible to work with.
Dude, this is, okay, first of all, that's super cool, number one. And number two, this is such interesting timing that we're doing this podcast now, because literally in the past, like I've dabbled a little bit here and there with some programming stuff over the years. There's been somewhat of an interest in it, but never enough to really jump in the past like week or two. I've really been taking a good chunk of time to learn some foundations. Again, nothing crazy, but foundations in SQL and in Python and Django.
And that's what it's about. It's about the foundations. I'm glad to hear you're learning Python. That's what I do all my research in.
Dude, it's amazing. And like I did a course that was, I know we're getting kind of in the weeds and jargony here, but I do want to stick on this for a second, even though we'll get to jump up in a little bit, but first programming. So
of course,
the learning, going through SQL, for anyone who knows SQL, like as I was going through it, it made sense, but it's I didn't realize that it was stiff until I bounced back to Python, and I was like, whoa, now I understand why people who are programmers enjoy this language so much. And it's interesting that in the vibe right now, and in talking briefly before this, I feel like we're firing on the same level. And I find that with jumpers and with other people who are programmers, there's some kind of a similarity there, because one of my closest friends works at Qualcomm and he does stuff there that I think is moving in the direction of machine learning and stuff too. So this is really interesting. Can we dig a little bit deeper into your research? Because I'm curious how you said you apply it for biology.
Yeah, that's right. So I gave the example of images and images of faces because it's much easier to intuitively understand what we're doing there. It's very easy to understand what a face is. We look at those million numbers that are represented as pixels, and we immediately recognize all of those super high level features, like the person's hair color, hairstyle, and just all of the features that make up the face. So that's an easy example to understand. Very, very hard for the computer to understand, and that's what all this research goes into. But what I do when I apply it to biological data is I'm trying to get something out that a human actually can interpret from data that humans really can't interpret at all. So the data I'm working with could represent, um, the expression of genes across the entire genome of a cell. And so maybe you give me tens of thousands of different cells, and for each of them you can tell me, okay, this gene is active in this cell, this gene isn't active, and so on. And so you have this massive data set of all these cells, all these genes, and you basically want to figure out, what different types of cells do you have in there. And you could have a million or so different data points within each cell, and you can't really do that by hand. So in the same way that you could compress an image of a face into some low dimensional simple representation, you could do that same thing with, say, a cell. It's a little bit harder to intuitively think about what that means because it's harder to intuitively understand what that data from each cell is representing.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
the concept there is the same. So the high level idea there is called representation learning, where we are trying to represent complex data in a simpler way. And so the biologists in the lab that I work in, they would give me that raw data from all the cells, and then I would design some learning algorithm that can separate those cells into different clusters. So an example of what those clusters might be is my lab really focuses heavily on type 2 diabetes research and looking at cells coming from the pancreas. So there's a lot of different types of cells in the pancreas. The ones that produce insulin are beta cells. And in patients that have type 2 diabetes, those beta cells are no longer producing insulin. So if you give me a bunch of cells from patients with type 2 diabetes and cells from patients without type 2 diabetes, and I could separate them into those different clusters, then we could get a better idea of maybe what genes are contributing to the differences and what genes are maybe facilitating insulin production.
Dude, that is some cool stuff. This is like the beginning of my day basically, and it's really awesome to
Oh
jump
yeah, I
into
mean it's
this
like
kind of
8 a.m.
stuff.
for you.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
like, this is really fun to just like go real dig deep on this, and I'm really glad that this is where we're starting. Let's move. Well, we'll kind of move in the direction of some jump rope stuff in a second, but PhD versus masters. Um, in computer science, what do you find the differences to be between those two?
I'm a little bit of an outlier in this case because I started off by doing a dual degree program. So I got my BS and my MS at the same time over the course of 4 years, and now I'm just continuing to get my PhD.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
typically, though, I would say that if you want to do research in computer science, a master's degree might not necessarily be enough. So typically, you'll see people get master's degrees in computer science if they want to work in private industry, but they still want to maybe do research in private industry. But if you really want to get deep into academia and publish research papers and be known in the academic world in computer science, you probably need to go as far as getting a PhD.
And is that your focus?
So I think at some point, yeah, I am really drawn to academia. I enjoy doing research. I enjoy teaching, especially. But I don't think I want to jump right into academia. I think I would like to get some actual work experience under my belt first. But obviously, I have to finish my PhD first, so I've got time to figure that out.
Yeah. Nice. um okay, cool, dude. That was such a great way to start things off, and I suspect that we will reference back to a lot of this as we move forward, but let's take a left turn here,
Of course.
and let's move into YouTube, because as we were talking about before this, you and I like kind of know each other, but like we've
Hmm.
not met in real life, but we've talked a lot. Let's can you kind of lay the foundation of why you originally started to post on YouTube and
Hmm.
when that was?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So I mean, first obvious reason that I'm sure we both share is that we probably both thought jump rope was the coolest sport ever, and we
Mhm.
wanted to share it with people because
Yep,
who doesn't want to share something they think is that cool? But
exactly.
I do think that maybe there was a sort of deeper motivation behind that, at least for myself. So I started uploading videos to YouTube, specifically promotional videos for my team at the time, back in I want to say 2008, 2009. And so that was the same time that I discovered the sport of tricking through YouTube. And that was actually sort of the beginning of tricking really growing as a sport through online video sharing. And I mean, I was a result of that. I found out about the sport because people were sharing videos. And so seeing that and seeing how quickly a sport could become widely recognized just completely by sharing videos online. I thought, could this also be done for jump rope? Could you spread a sport just by sharing videos?
That's interesting. So your goal from the get was not just to connect, but also to bolster the sport.
Yeah, yeah. I saw it as one way of spreading the sport beyond just the community that we usually work within.
Mhm.
So usually, if you want to grow the sport of jump rope, you need connections. You need to
Right,
be connected to someone who jump ropes to get involved. But with the internet and with video sharing, anyone could see a
right.
video of jump rope and realize that it's something that they're interested in or something that they want to try.
And it's worked. I've talked to a lot of folks on the podcast and off who have seen videos of Nick or LJ or these different, top tier athletes in the sport, and then they're like, "Oh, that's actually possible with jump rope." And they had been using it in a lighter context just for workouts. Now they see that this is possible, and they seek out resources and then are now aware of all the things you can do with a jump rope. Whether they do it competitively or recreationally, they're still exposed in a really good way.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. So most of I think the sort of methods that we conventionally used for growing the sport of jump rope were centered on competitive jump rope and the way that we saw jump rope as a sport, but that's not how everyone sees it. So you mentioned, all these fitness jumpers and CrossFit jumpers. They see jump rope completely differently, but they're still doing the same thing.
Hmm.
And so there's different opportunities to spread the sport to those people.
If you're down, let's kind of keep on the subject of growth. I'm really curious your thoughts on, um, I guess, just loosely what you think should be done, what you think works, because the mindset you have, I really like, because I think a lot of times, at least for myself, coming from the competitive world, for a while, all I could see was the competitive world. And
Hmm.
anyone who was jumping was either jumping competitively or just some lesser version of jump rope that didn't really count. And it took me a long time to really understand what you articulated just now, and what we've come to learn, which is like we're all part of the same community of jump rope with the same sport. There's just different pieces of the sport. I'm curious what your thoughts are in terms of like growing and how you think we should accomplish that.
Yeah, yeah. I definitely think that accessibility has been one sort of barrier to growth in the sport. So in one way, jump rope is extremely accessible. So we love to brag in the jump rope world about how it's so physically accessible. All you need is a rope, and that is true. That's completely true. That's all you need to physically jump rope. But I think that leaves out an important factor, and that is the knowledge to get involved. So I think for us as competitive jump ropers, there's so much knowledge that we have and that we would have to share with someone for them to get involved in competitive jump rope. And so first of all, for someone that is not interested in the competitive side of things, that's probably pretty intimidating. And
Right.
and second of all, that knowledge might not actually apply to people that don't necessarily want to compete. And so really just spreading as much broad jump rope knowledge as possible, I think can really help grow the sport beyond just the small bubble of competitive jumpers that it's
Hmm.
been for so long. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing now with all of the spread of jump rope on the internet and on social media,
Hmm.
where so many people are seeing that there's so many different directions you can go in. You don't have to compete. You don't have to perform. You can just do it for fun. You can just do it for fitness, and you can
And
really
still
do
be a
whatever
really
you
good
want.
athlete too.
Absolutely, yeah.
You see so many jumpers that are most likely not going to compete because that's not their goal. But the skills they're throwing down are still really intense.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, jump rope is such a cool sport because you don't just have to focus on the physical aspect of it. It's an extremely mental sport as well. I mean, there's a lot of creativity that goes into it, a lot of mentally preparing for doing a trick. And so I think for people that maybe can be intimidated by some of the physicality of competitive jump rope, they can really find solace in just exploring the creative aspects of it. Because once you reach your physical limits in some sports, it can be hard to motivate yourself to continue doing it if there's not that sort of idea of continued growth. But in jump rope, you can always continue to grow, even if you do reach some sort of physical limit. You can always think of something else to try, and you can always try to get more creative.
Do you feel like jump rope is unique in that respect? Like as a sport, do you think it's unique from other sports based on what you've just described?
I think it's unique from many sports, but I think there's a lot of sports that also share that quality. So I think the way that I like to look at it is there's some sports that are sort of based around a game, like soccer, football, hockey, baseball, those sports where it's team versus team. You play a game, one team wins the game, one team loses the game, and there's physicality involved. There's probably a lot of creativity involved in some of the plays, but at the end of the day, it's team versus team. One team wins, one team loses. And then there's other sports like maybe jump rope, gymnastics, maybe like any freestyle sport like slope style skiing, snowboarding, that kind of thing, where so much of it is subjective and so much of it is personal to the athlete that there's just those are the sports that really appeal to me. Those are the sports I enjoy doing, I enjoy watching, and I just feel like I can connect more with those athletes knowing what goes into the sport other than just the physical aspect of it.
That makes sense. And so you mentioned creativity. We're discussing all the different ways you can explore the sport. What do you think in terms of developing creativity? How do you think that happens? And I talked to Devin Meek about this a while ago on a different podcast, and I'm curious what your thoughts are too in terms of how to develop creativity.
Yeah, yeah. So I first of all, I think creativity is not something that is just an implicit part of who someone is. I think it's something that can be learned and something that can be practiced. Uh, Specifically, I guess if I wanted to define it in terms of jump rope, it's what happens when you do something novel and it works, and someone else agrees that it's kind of cool. So you could
I
do
like that definition.
you could do something novel and it might not work, and that's fine. That's the creative process. You could do something novel and it works, but you think it kind of looks silly, and you would never really do it in a routine or a combo, but it's still part of the creative process. and
Yeah,
and
but
so
you still
I
did it.
yeah, yeah, and I think it's just something that can happen when you repeatedly practice some activity. So for example, in jump rope, we spend so much time in the beginning of our jump rope careers really mastering the basics and building a good foundation. And I think once you have built that foundation, your creativity just starts to naturally build. So when you're learning those basics, you sort of learn the natural progression. Like, this skill, you could do this new motion and it'll turn into this next step in the progression. But now, once you've built that foundation, you can make those steps yourself. And sometimes when you make a step, it could be new. You could figure out some new way of modifying a trick or some new motion that hasn't been thought of. in a trick before. And so that's when creativity happens, is when you can come up with your own progression.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with that. As you're describing that, it reminds me of the book Mastery, Robert Greene, and basically the main point is there's three phases. You're an apprentice, and then you're a craftsman, and then you're a master, right? And it's the same idea of what you're saying here, which is learning the foundations, understanding all different pieces, then practicing them and actually being able to do them. And then once you have all that set, that's when you can start playing around with how to combine things. Obviously, it's not as clean of a line with jump rope, because there's definitely certain skills that you can get more creative with versus others depending on your skill set as a jumper. But like, no, that makes a lot of sense, man. I like that a lot.
Oh yeah, yeah, and
That's
I
really
agree with
interesting.
what you're saying. It's more of a random walk than a straight line,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
more of many random walks because you could be extremely competent and creative with manipulation skills, but still working on your frog. And I think that's like such a great part about jump rope is you can be so good at your niche, and yet there's still so much more you could perfect and so much more you could work on in other aspects of jump rope. There's just it's never ending.
Yeah, let's stay here for a second, because as you were talking, it kind of like dawned on me. I was like, oh, I think a lot of people, at least within Instagram, just viewing things from each other, assume that you got to get it all. You got to be able to do all these different skills, and that they all are supposed to happen with each other. Whereas obviously, as you just stated, like that's not really how it goes. There's different types of skills, and you level up some of them faster or slower than others. Um, I'm curious if that was the case for you, if certain skills were easier to get than others.
I would say early on in my jump rope life, I definitely found power skills to be easier. It, it took me 5 years to get a TJ. I think around 5 years, if that's any reference for my slow progression. And so really, I think most of that came from the jumpers that I was really striving to be like.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up jumping on the rope and rockets around people like Stewart, and I don't know if you remember Marcus Taylor. He was also a rope and rocket,
Yeah.
and
Mm-hmm.
so I wanted to basically jump like them. Really powerful, really strong, really clean. And so I think for a lot of my early jump rope life, I tried to base my progression around how close I was getting to that.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't necessarily think that is the best way to progress. Now, obviously, it works for some people, and I think that idea of being well-rounded and just really good at almost everything is in itself a sort of style that some jumpers
Mm-hmm.
have developed. People like
Yeah.
Stewart, people like LJ, people like Porter, they have that style where they are just pretty much good at everything. And I think that is itself a style that you can strive for, but I don't think it's
Mm-hmm.
something that everyone should be trying to strive for. And so I think I sort of diverged from that a little bit, where originally I really wanted to be good at these super high level power skills. And I mean, I can do some cool power moves, but my body has politely asked that I not do that repeatedly. So, uh,
Politely requesting that you do not do that.
yeah. I mean, I've never been seriously injured, but I think my style in manipulation and sort of that sort of flow that I've developed over the past few years started because of an injury I sustained. I think around 2017, it really put me out for a few months, and all I could do was low impact manipulation, and so I really had a lot of fun doing that.
So real quick, just to double back, when did you first pick up a jump rope?
So that would have been, let's see, I started jumping after I saw the Rope and Rockets perform at my school when I was in kindergarten. So that would have
Gotcha.
been May of 2004. And then,
So you've been jumping for a very long time then.
yeah, quite a
Nice.
quite a while.
Okay.
Yeah, so I would have tried out for the Rope and Rockets that next summer.
Where did the interest in programming begin?
So yeah, that was something that didn't actually start until very late in my life, like around the end of high school. Although honestly,
Hmm.
I think it's something that I should have seen earlier. So
Why is
for a lot
that?
of for a lot of like middle school through high school, I was trying to figure out, what it is that I want to grow up and do as a
Hmm.
job, or maybe what I
Hmm.
want to study in college. And I was really, really dead set on doing visual effects and like computer graphics,
Dude,
like
yes,
CGI and 3D
because
work and stuff like that.
the
hmm
YouTube post, I know that you were like working on
hmm
that stuff. I just remembered that that's what's up. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. So I was really into that for like maybe 4 to 5 years, and honestly, I still am. It's still a hobby that I love doing. But I found digging deeper into that what I was really interested in is the computation going on under the hood, and not just using the programs, but how the programs work and how you can design programs like that. And so I think that's really where that sparked for me that interest in computer science. Is I've been using all of these computational frameworks for years, and really what I'm interested in is not using them but designing ones for myself.
Interesting. Did you ever like write expressions in After Effects or anything?
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Okay.
that was my small taste of scripting in After Effects.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then also, if you're familiar with Blender, it's
Hmm.
all written in Python. It's got a really nice Python interface. So
Gotcha.
that was where
Okay.
I started in Python.
That's a great play. Wow, that's really cool. That's interesting. So, oh dude, this is so cool because like because you created well, wow, okay. I'm like my brain's got to recurse a couple different different layers here. The Tricktionary. Um you created the Tricktionary. What was the goal behind that? I suspect it falls in line with some of the things we've already discussed, but what was the goal there?
hmm Yeah, so I mean, I've already talked a little bit about accessibility within the
Mm-hmm.
sport. So accessibility was the main motivation behind the Tricktionary. This idea that if you want to get involved in the sport, your really only chance, at least back in the early 2010s, was to have access to in-person workshops or live near someone who knows how to jump rope, or live somewhere that has a jump rope team. There just weren't many freely available resources for obtaining knowledge about the sport. So that was the main motivation behind making the Tricktionary, is just democratizing all of that information so that anyone can access it at any time. And then another reason, a sort of selfish reason for making it, is I wanted to test my ability to actually create a software system that works. So
Gotcha.
the
Okay.
Tricktionary was my first ever attempt at anything besides schoolwork.
Mm,
So it was the first big, like large scale software engineering project that I tried.
interesting. And so, did you do all of it?
Yeah, so starting off, I worked on the Android app in the back end for about a year, from like 2014 to 2015, I think. And so I published the Android app around then. And then I think a few months into it, I got in contact with Svante Bengtsson. He's a jumper from Sweden, and he has experience doing web design and web development. So he offered to design a web application along with me. And so he's been extremely helpful in getting the website up and running and facilitating some of the back end and like all the trick database and stuff like that, that I was able to put together when I was in high school, but I did it in a very, very bad way.
What was the difference between the way you did it versus the way that it is used now?
Well, if anyone who knows how software engineering works is listening, they'll probably cringe at what I originally did. Is I had the entire Tricktionary, every trick, every name, every description, every video, every type, and so on, in just this massive list. And I just had a Tricktionary object that took that massive list as an input, and it generated everything. It was a mess. It was a working mess. So it worked for me because I was the only one developing. But then when Svante joined, I was like, yeah, here's the Tricktionary. Do whatever you want. It was like we need to fix this a little bit. And so we now have the entire Tricktionary hosted in a real-time database on something called Firebase. It's
Gotcha.
a
Okay.
service provided by Google. It allows you to have like a central backend where you can then really easily hook up like an Android app, a web application, an iOS app, and basically any other front end that you want.
That's interesting. Okay. And your videos are there too?
So the videos are all hosted on YouTube. So I've
Gotcha. Okay.
actually
So
had
they're
some
embedded.
people request just the playlist rather than the tricks organized on the website. They just want the videos themselves. So I just have a playlist on YouTube for that. And it saves us storage space because you have to pay.
Yeah. 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 A lot too. Oh man.
Yeah.
So did you ever look into Lee's Jumfabet and Tricktionary?
Yeah. So I remember first ever hearing about them, I think through the Jump documentary.
Yeah. Yes.
Hmm.
Same.
Yeah. I've never gone all the way through them, but I do know that he has like a very comprehensive like DVD collection of not just the tricks, but actual tutorials and breaking down the skills. Yeah. So I can't really speak for um, how helpful it is because I've never used it myself, but I do believe it's an extremely helpful resource that's out there.
Yeah, I've looked at I've read the jump a bit. I haven't watched the videos, but I've read the what he's written about it and the way he's kind of basically taken all of jump rope and pieced it apart in a way that is I think visually less understandable, but from a system perspective and from like if you already know this information, it makes a lot of sense. Um, and it's very interesting because I feel like I'm wondering when I talk with a lot of different jump ropers, people have different views on the sport or how they progress. And I think that there are a lot of things that are very innate in the way competitive jump ropers approach jump rope. But I think a lot of folks do like, and I think this will probably circle back in some way to your creativity piece, but a lot of people see like skill and then another skill and another skill and another skill. But I feel like there are a lot of systems within jump rope in terms of linking different things and viewing parts coming together. Um, I'm wondering if you see it that way, because as someone obviously who's very deep into programming and you've naturally had this tendency to, in some regard, to work with software and see things that way. I'm wondering if that's been your perspective on jump rope, or if it's something different.
Yeah, I definitely think I share a similar perspective in that jump rope is not as modular as I think some resources like the Tricktionary might make it out to be. I mean, the Tricktionary just presents here's a skill, here's a skill, here's a skill, and that is one aspect of jump rope, and it's an important aspect. It's probably the foundational aspect that jumpers should learn if they want to uh, be able to put together combinations and routines. But it is only one aspect of the sport. That is the modular part of the sport where, in a combo, you are just stacking tricks on top of each other. But there's another layer on top of that, as you said. It's how you put the tricks together, how you transition, how you just move your body overall throughout the entire combo. It's way more than just the tricks. And I think that's something that can, in a way, definitely be taught. And at workshops, sometimes we do even focus on, this session, we're not going to learn individual tricks. We're going to try to put together combinations or we're going to work on transitions. And so we do try to teach it. But I think that layer of going one layer above just the tricks themselves is part of where style really comes from. Because at the end of the day, most jumpers are doing combinations of most of the same skills. There's obviously some specific tricks that certain jumpers do that they're known for or that only they can do. But at the end of the day, most people are just putting together the same combination of skills, and yet all of them do it differently. Every combination, you could give a jumper the same set of tricks as another jumper, and they would put together completely different combinations and done in completely different ways. And so I think that's mainly where style comes through. Is you can definitely do individual tricks in your own way and with your own style, but I think the sum total of a combination, layer above the tricks is where your style really comes through.
What do you, as you're discussing style, to me, the way I would define a style would be any way of executing skills that is uh, basically recognized or recognized when you see it in someone, or like you can replicate it in other places as well. An example being my friend Jimmy Reynolds, who Jimmy says relax on Instagram. His style is very much his own, but I'm now seeing a lot of folks replicate it almost exactly. And that to me seems to be like, as you were discussing, jumpers who are able to do, all different types of skills really well. That's a style in and of itself. I tend to view style defined by like replicating what the way someone does skills, aka like Jimmy, right? Like he kind of to me defines Jimmy style or street style. Um, what are your thoughts on the definition of a style? And I know that I think what you said previously already kind of factors into this, but I'm curious your thoughts.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you on that. In that, to develop a style, you generally build upon other styles. So a lot of people would like you say emulate part of Jimmy's style, but just as they continue to do that and as they grow as a jumper, that will probably branch off into its own style that they can make their own. So the way that I like to look at it, and this is similar to what you've mentioned, is that if someone just saw a silhouette of you jumping, would they be able to recognize it just from your style? And so I think if you can answer yes, then you do have sort of a well recognized style. And if it is recognizable, then that means that people are probably going to try to emulate it in their own way. And from that, you're now helping someone build their own style, which is, I think, a really cool sort of unspoken collaborative part of jumping rope where, I mean, there's not a single style, but everyone is sort of learning from everyone else.
Yeah, you're always pulling from different pieces. What has been because I purposely did not do a large amount of digging into your history because I wanted to all be fresh. What is
Mhm.
with competition? What is like the one or several of the top accolades you've achieved in competitive jump rope, or just anything related to jump rope for that matter?
Mhm. So let's see. I've competed at World Jump Rope since the very first one back in 2011, and so I think I won my first Grand World title in 2014. So that was when I finally got the chance to really jump with a group of really powerful jumpers. That was when I formed a group with Dane, Ridge, and Stewart with the Comets. And so that year was probably one of my most successful competition years. We had a really good single rope team freestyle, double Dutch singles, and double Dutch pairs freestyle that I was really happy with. And I still love going back to look at those routines. And then as far as any other just like jump rope experiences, I would probably point to some of my competitions in the double Dutch contest realm as some of my favorite competition experiences. Not because I did well or because our fusion routines were revolutionary. I mean, they were a lot of fun, but just getting to see that side of competitive jump rope was really fun. We did DDC B in Belgium, and then we did IDDC in France. And it's just such a fun aspect of the sport. I think everyone should try it, even if they don't think they're very good at fusion, which by the way, I'm not. But it was still a lot of fun.
No, that's really cool. I'm really curious to kind of break down because a world champion title is a big deal, and I'm curious to kind of back it up and see what it took to achieve that because you said that year you were working with an extremely powerhouse team. Do you feel like that was the unlock to maximize your skills? Do you feel like your training changed at all? I'm interested to kind of break that down into the elements that you think contributed to being able to achieve a world champion title.
So I think specifically, if we look at that year, I think probably the main reason some of our groups were so successful is because of the people that were involved, not because of their skill level, but just because of the way we worked together and the way we were able to collaborate. I think we just as a group worked extremely well together. So, for example, that single rope team freestyle, it was me, Jarris, Ridge, and Stuart. And we were in completely different parts of the country for most of that competition season. And so we actually made that routine on Facebook, just, chatting with each other, sending videos. Um, and so even through that, we were able to collaborate extremely well. And so early on, I thought that was a really good sign for what to come. And so then finally, when we were all together for the last few months before competition, really, really preparing for these routines, that's really crunch time, especially when everyone's been in different parts of the country for most of the season. But we were really, really, I think, able to come together and work really, really efficiently together. And honestly, I think that was mostly carried by Stuart. He is incredible to work with. If you ever get the chance to put together a routine with him or just jump with him at a workshop, it's a great experience.
What is it about working with him that is different?
Uh, Probably both the ideas he brings to the table. Usually they're really good ideas. Sometimes they're crazy ideas that he'll force you to try because it might be cool if it works. And not only that, but also just his willingness to also try anyone else's ideas. I mean, we had some pretty reckless ideas that year. I remember one idea that we had for our triad. We wanted to incorporate a double wall spin. So if you're familiar with a wall spin,
Wow.
it's essentially like a cartwheel, but you put your hands on a wall instead of the ground. And so we wanted to do that off of a person's back, but
Yeah.
also have someone else doing it off of like their chest in the front.
Whew.
Because we had
Wow.
been messing
There's
around with
so many
that
ways
trick.
that can go wrong.
Yeah. So we didn't really think about that at the time. But I was the person, standing there getting wall flipped off of.
Uh-huh.
And I think it might have been Ridge wall spinning on my back and Stuart coming at my chest. And so we set it up a few times. It seems like it's probably going to work. I mean, can't go that wrong. And so Ridge
Did
jumps
you
up
have
on
any
me.
mats? Do you have any mats set up, or you just kind of threw
No,
it?
no, this is just on the wood floor. Yeah. I mean, I wasn't flipping, so I was okay with that.
Yeah, you're like,
But
whatever, it's all good.
yeah, so the goal was for them to make contact at the same time, equalize the forces. That didn't quite happen. So Ridge is on my back first, so he pushes me forward a little bit. So my head is like pushed forward, and then Stuart jumps up, and his legs just slap me across the face, and we all go
Oh
down.
no!
But I mean,
Yikes!
it could have been a good idea, and that's the kind of that's the sort of way we come up with these ideas. Is you think of something like that, and maybe it might seem silly at first, but a good idea did end up coming of that because we put that trick in our team freestyle, but instead of one person, we had two people facing each other.
Gotcha. That's a really the trial and error piece is it's just a big piece of like you don't think something's possible, and then like I feel like that's happened for me more so in single rope, where there's a skill that you think of and it's not happening, and then a couple days or a couple months later you revisit it, and for whatever reason it's just suddenly a little bit more attainable than it was.
Definitely. And I think that pattern in general of sort of things that you perceive as being impossible suddenly becoming possible is a huge trend in the jump rope world. Not just for jumpers personally, but just overall in the sport, where things that me and you maybe when we first started jumping would think completely impossible are now easy skills for some people.
Yeah.
It's just so cool to see.
Yeah, well, basically anything that Porter and Seth and Hamisi do, that just there you go.
Yeah.
Like, shouldn't be possible.
Right.
Yeah.
And I love to see it. It makes me so happy. I think part of it is really just because possibilities are really only including what you've seen before and then maybe a little beyond that. So if you haven't seen it before, odds are you probably won't think it's immediately possible. So think back to like 2007, back before anyone had done a moneymaker. The idea was up there. People knew it was a trick that could be attempted, but no one really thought it was possible. And then Nick lands it. Suddenly, people have seen it done. Suddenly, it gets a little bit more possible. But oh, that's just Nick, so it's not really possible yet. And then, a few years later, more people are landing it. A few years later, more people are landing it. And it's just becoming more and more possible as you see more and more people land it. And I think that applies to a lot of skills in jump rope, where the speed of progression is just accelerating.
Yeah, no, I agree. It reminds me of, I believe it's like the 4 minute mile when like that became, when that was accomplished, I believe in the Olympics. I don't know the exact history of this, but I believe like once that was like, oh, that's possible, that became the new benchmark effectively.
Hmm. Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah,
And I think that also applies to speed. The first 400 was a little bit before our time. First 500 was in 2012, and now people are pushing for 600. It's
yeah.
ridiculous.
Or people trying to do 8 unders, in one
Yeah,
jump,
yeah.
like that. Like it's wild. And honestly, like I want to know your thoughts on this, because to me, from what I see, granted, I don't know all the teams, so like this could be totally wrong, but from what I've been seeing, from what I've experienced growing up, most jumpers, to my knowledge, don't necessarily cross train like a competitive athlete would in another sport. And I feel like from what I've heard in rumors and quick discussions with people, the folks that are breaking those records are. And I feel like once competitive jump ropers, and I talked with Kaylee and Nick about this on a couple podcasts, but once jumpers take on this mindset of legitimately training like an elite athlete in a sport, not just go. I mean, a lot of jumpers go and work really hard at jump rope practice, but then adding in workouts outside of that help you, with strength, with all these different things. I feel like that's when we'll start to see an insane progression. Like I feel like part of the like you said, the rate of new skills coming about is increasing. I feel like the part of that is because a lot of athletes that are at the top, I think, are doing more cross training, more exercises outside of jump rope to help make their jumping better. Granted, I obviously don't know the details of all this, but to me, it seems like that piece is going to help.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. And I think you're right. I think that is happening. And I think that is something that naturally happens with a lot of young sports, where when the sport first starts off, to be the best, you're working with a very small pool of athletes, and so you probably don't need to be cross training. If you did, obviously you would be better, but it might not be necessary. But now the sport has grown so much. There's so many jumpers, vying to be the best, really trying to push their skills to the next level, that just by probability, more people are going to end up cross training. More people are going to be trying to push themselves harder. And so I think it's probably a big aspect of why we're seeing such a huge speed up in the progression of skills.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, that is. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens, especially like with people like I find Kaylee and Nick to be some of the forefront people of those pushing that idea that we should be training like elite athletes. I'm curious to see how that happens. Although I did just watch a video on Facebook the other day that just came out for one of the jumpers, I believe in Hong Kong, and explaining the story of how that jumper and that coach came to form a team. And in watch this video is like 4 or 5 minutes long, and I watched the whole thing. And in describing it, the athlete, who I believe is one of the world record holders for one of the events, one or both the events of speed, he described that he basically would like get up at like 5 a.m. and then jump for a couple hours, and then like jump for a standard practice afterwards, which totaled like somewhere between like 4 and 8 hours a day or something like that. Like I forget
Wow.
what it was. Yeah. And I was like, oh, well, if you're doing that every single day, and he's like, yeah, I feel like, like I think he said like 3 or more years. Those numbers could be totally off. But anyway, you stack up that amount of hours training really hard. Like that also, that kind of blows out the cross training is nice. When you're putting
Yeah.
in that much volume on speed work, like you're gonna get good.
Oh yeah, yeah, inevitably. I agree with that. Well, so I'm wondering what you think about something that I've talked with some other jumpers before. It seems like most speed records are broken by young jumpers early in their career.
Hmm.
I've noticed just like the fastest jumper at any current time seems to be a younger jumper. I think back to when I was first starting off jumping. Tori was probably the fastest jumper around, and that was back when she would have been, like 10 to 13. And then I think back to when I was really trying to push my speed scores. The fastest jumper was, I believe, Xiaolin from China, who had set the world record, and he was 12 or 13. Um, but then I also do have counter evidence to that, which is Mike Fry, who has
Yeah.
leveled up his speed game recently. So I'm just wondering if you think it's possible for maybe someone like Mike, who is now hardcore training speed, to get back to that level, or if it's just so difficult to truly speed up.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, before we get to my answer, I was on the floor at a competition with Mike while he was doing his thing, and I did not practice enough for 3 minutes, and that dude
Hmm.
wiped the floor with me, and it was really cool to be next to him and see him just absolutely crank.
Yeah.
It was pretty awesome. But
Oh yeah. I remember the first competition when he came back. It was awesome.
yeah, he is such a good guy.
Hmm.
But yeah, in terms of your question, the thing, my immediate answer that I want to say is that no, it's not for younger jumpers. But this could be, again, who knows? I could be totally wrong about this. I'm not like researching this kind of stuff, but the reason why that's like my gut instinct is because one, the body's not done growing. It's basically just starting and going through a very intense growing phase.
Yeah.
So it doesn't make sense to me from a biological standpoint that that would be the peak. Um, the other factor that I think is important is, have these people created, Mike aside, but the younger jumpers, have they hit the world records because of their age or despite their age? And
Hmm.
I think that it most likely is despite their age, and the reason why is, number one, in from what I've heard from a lot of jumpers and from just talking to people, like most people, speed is not fun and they don't enjoy it. But
Yeah.
these world
Fair.
champions get in the gym and like it doesn't matter if you like it or not, you're doing it. And you're doing it as best as you possibly can. If you don't do it well enough, you do it again.
Hmm.
And there's a huge amount of discipline and training, like 4 hours of speed to 8 hours of speed a day. Like, get out of here, right?
Yeah.
So, and how many jumpers do that? I suspect that the number is extraordinarily low. Um, and I think at the moment, to this whole point of cross training, I think that because, like you're saying, the pool is relatively small, even still,
Hmm.
considering the size of sports. I think that a lot of jumpers like have fun and do well, but very few put in extraordinarily dedicated time.
Yeah.
And
To speed specifically, I agree with
yeah,
that.
to speed, but you could also apply that to freestyle too, because I think the mindset that you have when you approach your freestyle training is different. Like you describing your world champion routine with the guys, right? You got in the gym and it was like no nonsense. Like, yeah, you're having fun for sure, but like you're there to make it happen. And you're
Hmm.
there to take all of your cumulative skills and put out the absolute best and a little bit more than that. And that mindset is very different than like my experience on my first team growing up was that people were just, the large majority of the teammates that I was jumping with, the goal was to just slap a routine together or get it
Hmm.
done, or I don't really want to run my routine 5 times in a row. and then just kind
Yeah.
of being okay with doing it messy. And that doesn't lead to being a high performer. It just can't, right? Because
Yeah.
and so I don't know if that's replicated on other teams, but I think that a lot of these younger jumpers have succeeded despite their age, in that they've they've put in just a sheer raw amount of time into what they're doing, and the time that they put in, they're razor sharp on their goals and their mentality. I think that the next question is, how many jumpers do we know that are over 20 and still training competitively?
Yeah,
And
that's true.
there's a couple, right? And in talking with Stuart about his, I don't remember what his age was during the competitions that we talked about on the podcast previously, but he was definitely I believe at the time he was doing his fellowship, so he's definitely out of high school. He's adult now, right? And he's putting in a tremendous amount of work, and then he's out there throwing down massive scores. So, I think that when we look at that, it's like how much the questions I would ask in order to answer that question, if we were going to really divide it apart, it would be how much effort are the jumpers putting in, both in jump rope and out, like again, cross training, and what is the mental state during that training. And I think that you have to, and then also taking into consideration environment, in case that's a factor as well. I believe it could be. I believe being around a team of high performers will make a better jumper than a jumper who is a champion but they're solo.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And also to your point, I've talked to many jumpers that say they are continuing in the sport, not because they want to win competitions or be the best, but just because they love the community, that they love the
Right,
people
and they want
they're
to be
around.
there.
Yeah, and so they go to practice for, seeing their friends and probably for fitness. And, some of them probably do also want to win competitions, but that's not the case for everyone. Everyone is involved for a different reason. So I think that definitely plays a role
And
in how people train.
and it's notorious that jumpers, once they go to college, drop off or stop working out as much, because now you have new interests. You have life is readjusting. It's changing. When you're in middle school or high school, that's very normal to spend hours a day dedicated to whatever sport or sports you choose. And you have that time because it's typically it's go to school, and then you've got like sports, and then whatever other hobbies, family things that you want to do, right? When you go to college, it's like, hey, get a job and you gotta get a degree. Or like if you're not going to college, right, you're like working, and like once you start working, there's a whole other, it's just a whole different mindset, and it's very difficult, I think, to then maintain the same level of effort, especially because like then you're talking again about displacing athletes from their home team.
It's so
And
much easier when it's well structured and all laid out for you. But when
yep,
you're trying to train by yourself, it's a whole nother game.
I don't think anyone can coach themselves. Like I think that people can definitely stay disciplined and give themselves like, okay, like do these things, and they can know more or less certain things to do, but I don't think that you can fully coach yourself. I
Yeah.
don't
I
see
mean,
that.
you have to win over your self control pretty much every day of the year,
Yeah.
the entire season, and I mean
Yeah.
that's just so difficult.
Yeah, especially when like there's like real life things pulling at you.
Hmm
There's professional things, and there's like you're also a human and you want to go hang out and have fun with your friends, like, but does that cut into training time, and you know what I mean? And all these different things. So in terms of, are the young jumpers is that the prime age? I think that we'd have to like test out with older jumpers who are willing to put in the time and make it somewhat equal. You know what I mean? I personally feel like looking at other sports, you look at that age of like 20, give or take, a few years, and I feel like that's probably going to be the most prime spot.
Yeah, physically and as far as like how much time you have available to
Mhm,
commit to the sport. I mean, from there,
exactly.
your time just generally would decrease.
And like,
Yeah.
it'll be interesting too, like once we start to have competitive leagues that are larger, and there's money prizes, and there's sub leagues, right? That are
Mhm.
like more like niche leagues. Like, what's that gonna do once there's actually professional jump roper? Like, obviously they're professional jump ropers now, but I mean, like, winning the competitions is your profession, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Um,
I think if you want an example of that, you could look to Japan and their double Dutch contest leagues. If you talk to the athletes over there, they call themselves double Dutch players. That is their job. I mean, they make a living by doing double Dutch. They go to schools and they give talks, they give performances. It is a full time job because the organizations over there have made it possible.
do you know the details of what they've done differently that like makes that possible?
I don't know many details about it. I've mainly just talked to some of the jumpers from Regstyle. They came to Jump with the Stars earlier this year.
Okay,
If you
that's cool.
know, yeah, yeah, if you know Jump Rock, he was there.
I don't know people individually, but I did watch the video and I did notice. I was like, hey, that's cool. It's a nice set of people. There's always so many different types of jumpers at that workshop and several of the other really large ones.
Yeah, that tends to be the goal in inviting staff is they try to get as diverse of a group as possible, all different countries, all different styles, as much as they can.
So cool. What are your thoughts on competitions and leagues? Because you recently, I believe it was this last weekend, you did
Hmm.
LJ's online tournament, and I was watching the majority of that. I'm curious, not just not just LJ's tournament, but just in general, this idea of niche leagues or smaller tournaments, or even the current standing NGBs. Like, what are your thoughts on those developing and what you're seeing so far?
Oh, I love it. I absolutely love it. So it seems like the very very long term goal for a lot of jumpers and a lot of just members of the organizations seems like one of the very long term goals is to reach the Olympics, and I think that is an achievable goal for many. But I think having more fun, low stress, smaller sort of competitions like you're mentioning would benefit a group of jumpers that don't necessarily want to dedicate their lives to trying to become Olympic athletes or the best of the best in jump rope. And I also think it would facilitate growing the sport because obviously if you get involved right now you don't have too many options for competitions. If you're lucky enough to live near a team, they might host a small competition, but besides that you're probably going to be competing at a national level for your first competition ever, which is stressful for a lot of
Yeah,
people. I mean, that's
yeah.
that's a lot of pressure. Um, and so I would love to see more small competitions. And the thing I really really enjoyed about LJ's competition was just all the unconventional fun events. It's just it's such a fun way to compete. There were a few competitions like that back in the day where they would have these sort of fun small events. Like there was a competition in Indiana hosted by the Indy Air Bears called the Bears Blast, where they would do like pairs, speed, and just fun events like that. So I think yeah, the more we can do that, the more open the competitive environment might feel. Like if you're a little first grader getting involved in jump rope and you go to your first competition and they're talking about the Olympics, that's
Yeah.
a little intimidating, I would think.
Or if you spent
But
the
if
entire year for nationals and let's do the one competition a year, and it's like, don't blow it in your 60 seconds on stage. Like,
Oh yeah, and
yeah,
I honestly I think that can sort of take an emotional toll on people. Is
yeah.
is they prepare all year for something that is hyped up a lot. I mean, when you're going to your first nationals, it feels pretty hype. And if you don't do well, I mean, that can be a big emotional toll. Like you just spent an entire year preparing for a failure. It's I mean, it's just traumatic for some people. And so I think if you can introduce people to a competitive environment in a less trial by fire sort of method, it would just make a lot more people willing to go the next step and go to those higher level competitions. I do think a nice hierarchy of leagues and small competitions is ideal. And I think that is one of the main goals of AMJRF now.
Nice. Yeah, I've been talking with a bunch of folks from there. And it seems like they're really making a lot of moves, which is really cool. The leagues and these competitions, it's been so interesting because I feel like, Mike and I, because Mike has been in Southern California for a while, and for the past several years, we've been able to meet up, which has been honestly amazing. Because I mean, you know how much of a legend Mike is, and
Oh, of course.
yeah, and even a few years ago, yeah, I want to say it was 2017, maybe it was 2018. It was like the first time we like legit met up to hang out, and it was in Malibu. And we were hanging out and shooting something for like his Instagram page. I don't know I forget what the detail was, but we were doing something and we were chatting. And even at that time, he was bringing up ideas of certain league, competition things. And we were kind of bouncing ideas back and forth, and, fast forward and throughout those years, I've heard a lot of other people discussing these things. Now we're seeing like LJ's executing on this. Devin has talked a bunch about this even last year when we did our podcast. I'm sure that's been on his mind forever. And I'm sure that there's many other jumpers too, who have thought similarly, which is really, really cool because
I think it's been a fantasy for years. I mean, you hear all kind of talk about, we need to have a rope dunk competition, or we need to have this and this competition. And you hear people say that all the time, but to actually see it happening now is so exciting.
Yeah, and I think that it's going to work really well because if we've got, like you said, a lot of different competitions, and if there are cash prizes in those competitions and people are now allowed to be professional competitive jump ropers, right? Because you're still professional if you get paid technically, but in terms of like really narrowing the focus into a professional athlete, right? If there's more competitions that are happening, and there's more prize money, that allows that to grow. And then I think that could be one of the big unlocks that then allows that person to remove those external pressures we were talking about. And then we start to see people who are 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, maybe even later, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, putting in that effort to become a top tier athlete.
Oh yeah. And that goes back to accessibility. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember a conversation I had with Sean Hamilton at my last World Jump Rope.
Mm-hmm.
This was in the very early stages of the IGRU merger.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was basically explaining to me the end goal of how he sees jump rope and competitive jump rope working out in the US and internationally as far as US athletes. And so he said the goal is to pay athletes' way to go to these international competitions. So you would try out for, America's jump rope team or Team USA or whatever they decide to call it, and then you would be paid to go to competition. And so that way, Team USA truly would be the best jumpers around, not just those jumpers that have access to the competition.
Right. But the actual best of the best.
And so, I mean, that just really makes the competitive world just so much more accessible.
Yeah, there's just so much to think about. And like, even as we're talking, it's very thought provoking. It's very cool because there's just so like jump rope seems as a competitive athlete, a competitive jump roper who has seen the sport for whatever, the better part of a decade or so longer. It's like, it seems like there's just so much awesomeness and so much growth already, but I feel like we're just now getting to the point where things are going to start tipping forward and we're going to really accelerate. And it's like, man, what is that even going to look like, because every day you've got high-end jumpers throwing down crazy scores and crazy skills. What, on this idea of moving forward, what are you hoping to accomplish with jump rope in the future? If there's anything that you are thinking about, maybe not. Maybe you're just
Yeah.
focusing
So,
on the programming.
so I think you sort of already mentioned one of this isn't like a personal goal of mine, but just something that I hope to see and something that I hope to help facilitate, and that is ensuring that future generations are better prepared and more skilled than we ever were. And I think that is currently very true. I mean, I think the current generation of top level jumpers has far surpassed anything I could have achieved. So it's really great to see just how good the jumpers that I and other jumpers from my generation have taught throughout the years when they were young, just seeing them excel and surpass us. And so I want to be a part of that as much as possible, is just making sure that we continue to push further. I've talked about this a little bit before in terms of uh, jump rope being a unique sport because it's so young. So you could think of some sport like maybe track. So it takes years and years of training to reach the level of an elite track athlete. And you might train your entire life to shave off like a tenth of a second from some record time. So that's a sport that's well established, and it has reached sort of a plateau of performance where people can push it further, but it just takes so much effort compared to the early stages of the sport. And so I think jump rope's different for two reasons. Firstly, is that it involves both creativity and physical fitness. So even if you reach some physical limit, there's always room to innovate. And also because jump rope is such a young sport, even if there is some plateau of the physical limits of the sport or the creative limits of the sport, which first of all, I don't really think there is a creative plateau. But even if there is, I think we are far from it just
Hmm.
because the sport is so young.
Hmm. That's interesting, man. There's a lot coming down the pipeline. What,
Hmm.
if your younger version of you, the one that just started posting on YouTube for the first time, and and then we sort of digitally met, could
Yeah.
see who you are now, what would they say?
Well, probably if they found out that I ended up doing computer science and they found out where I am in my academic career, they would probably laugh and just go, "Oh, of course, I should have seen that coming." And so I already sort of mentioned I didn't really know what I wanted to study for a while, and so the younger me from back then was really interested in all those sort of video graphics, visual effects, and that sort of things. Um, and so it should have been probably obvious to me that I was going down the route of coding and computer science, but apparently I didn't know it then. And as far as jump rope, probably seeing my progress as a jumper, I think I would probably have been even more motivated to continue jumping. I've already sort of mentioned this before. I didn't progress very quickly early in my jump rope life. It took me like 5 years to get a TJ, and there were a lot of other tricks that I just was completely stuck on for the longest time. And there were very few. There were a few points in my early jump rope life where I just felt like I wasn't gonna continue to progress and that I had reached a plateau. And clearly that wasn't true. I have continued to progress. But when you're at that point, it's hard to see what
Right.
direction you could go in.
Hmm.
And so if I had been able to see the progression that I would make in the following years, I would probably be even more motivated to continue.
Yeah, that is, dude, this is, oh my gosh, this has been so much fun. Like, I knew that we were gonna have a great time chatting, but this has just been, oh, it's just been so good.
Yeah, it's really great to talk to you, Nate.
Yeah, this has been, I'm a little bit surprised that we hadn't connect sooner than this, just in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm glad we did this, and I think now would be a good time to kind of wrap up with the last main question of the podcast, which is, what is jump rope to you?
Hmm. Yeah. So I would say that jump rope to me is firstly it's a global community of some of my best friends, some of the most genuine and talented people I've ever met. And for myself personally, jump rope is a creative and physical outlet that I think is good for both my brain and my body. And so because of that, I plan to jump rope for as long as I physically can.
That is a great answer.
Thank you.
We've really, yeah, we've just covered so many angles of jump rope and so many corners, and I'm sure we could keep talking for like 3 more days in a row, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
But I definitely want to let you get back to the things you're doing, dude. Thank you so much for taking the time and doing this. It's really been extremely fun talking with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me over here, Nate. This was a really great conversation. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, man, absolutely. We'll definitely have to have you back on at some point.
Yeah, I would love to, and maybe one day we'll actually get to meet up, not virtually.
Yes, dude. That's like
we did it before it was cool.
Yeah, dude. But okay, I know I was wrapping up, but I do want to point out one quick thing. Since you said that, back in the day, 10 years ago on YouTube, the things that we were posting, the way we were navigating the internet and social networking platforms, or whatever you want to categorize YouTube as, I feel like what we were doing then is exactly the same thing as what's happening now, just at a larger scale and different people.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love looking back at some of those old videos. I seem to recall a video of you attempting Sunny D 100 times in a row.
Yeah, man. So listen, I went to nationals one year and I got a Sunny D. But to your point about seeing people around you doing it and you would never have otherwise tried it, and then you're pumped because you're there and then you do it. I was like, wow, this is great. Went back to practice literally like the day or two after nationals, and I wanted to do a Sunny D, and so I tried it and I missed, and I was like, but I got it a few days ago. Like I can't just not get it
So
now.
you have to try again.
Yeah, and then it was, I kid you not, it was 2 hours straight of just that one skill.
Oh my gosh.
And like literally several times I packed my bags up, broke the camera, everything, done. And I was like out the door, and then I was like, nah, but I gotta try it a couple more times.
Yeah. I hope you got it. I don't remember. Did you get it by the end of that day?
It
Good,
took me
good.
like,
Okay.
I think it was like try like 102 or 103. I was able to pull it, and then I was really pumped, and then I left immediately. I was done after that.
Perseverance. And he's never done a Sunny D again.
No, no, I definitely done it.
You win Sunny D.
Although I do have a little bit of like a thing with that skill. Like if I can't get it within the first couple tries, I just will move past it, because it's like the one skill I know that I'll just get stuck and destroy my calves again by whipping them.
It is one of those skills. And I don't think you're the only one that has experienced that. I know I did when I was working on it at first. It's a rough one.
It's really tough, but
yeah,
man, this has seriously been really cool. We'll have you on again, and yeah, man, hope you have a good rest of your day.
Awesome. Yeah, I look forward to it. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day too. Once again, thanks so much for having me, Nate.
Hey, before you go, I just wanted to say one last thing. One of my main goals for this podcast is to share the stories, of other jumpers and provide a full picture about everything that's possible with a jump rope. The more people that hear this, the better. And it would really help me out if you sent this podcast to somebody you know, whether in real life or digitally on Instagram, Facebook, whatever platform you use. It would mean the world to me. So that's it. I hope you have a great rest of your day, night, lunch, evening, whatever time it is for you right now. See you later.